Natural Habitat Adventures is pleased to be bringing you this webinar today, An Encounter with the Polar Bears of Churchill. And we're joined today by Ben Bressler, who is the founder and president of Natural Habitat Adventures. Ben was raised in New Jersey and received his higher education at Skidmore College in Saratoga, New York. His first short-lived job was teaching at a boarding school in New Hampshire, and during his one-year teaching career, Ben took a group of students on a ski and outdoor adventure to Colorado and knew immediately he was going to pursue a career in travel and nature. In 1984, Ben decided to pursue his dreams independently, and it wasn't long before the International Fund for Animal Welfare brought him on board to help them develop a seal watching tourist industry to replace the seal hunt that was going on in eastern Canada. And in the 20-plus years since then, Ben has grown Natural Habitat Adventures to become a leader in world nature travel and has journeyed to dozens of countries in search of spectacular nature experiences. And I would imagine still near and dear to your heart, even though you're traveling and taking people all over the world, Ben, would be the polar bear experience in Churchill. And that's what we're here to talk about today, so welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Lee, and thank you for reminding me how many years I've been doing this. 2015 will be the 30th year. I was only 8 years old when I started. I'm just kidding you guys. But I wasn't terribly old, just 22 at the time, but Lee has reminded me that I'm getting on in years, so thanks. I want to welcome you all to this webinar. Thank you so much for spending the time this afternoon with me to talk about polar bears. It's just something that is so important to me. I'm really proud to be presenting to you today this webinar, not only because it's one of my favorite animals, the polar bear, but it's also an animal that is so important to our planet. The polar bear is an icon of the Arctic and a living symbol of conservation in the region. Today I won't spend too much time talking about these important issues of conservation, which is a subject, of course, that is at the core of everything that we do at Natural Habitat Adventures. But instead, I'll focus on the 6 ways you can view wild polar bears at close range and live to tell about it. Polar bears are considered to be fairly dangerous animals, obviously, if you catch them in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like any animal, you don't want to come between polar bear mother and a cub, and you don't want to surprise them. They can be extremely dangerous at times. They weigh up to 1,500 pounds and can stand up to 10 feet tall. And they're the largest living land predator and a marvel of adaptation in their environment. They're real survivors in their habitat. Pretty much every nature enthusiast is aware that polar bears live in the Northland, but most people are not really aware of the wide distribution of polar bears. There are 19 distinct polar bear subpopulations worldwide, from Greenland, Norway, and Russia and Europe to Canada and northern Alaska in North America. And there are currently about 20 to 25,000 polar bears in the world, and that number is highly likely to be declining. I joke about viewing polar bears and living to tell about it because it makes for an interesting subject for a webinar. But the fact is that viewing polar bears is extremely safe. And the best way to do this is to base yourself in the small grain port of Churchill, Manitoba, Canada, about 1,000 miles north of Winnipeg. There are other places to view polar bears in the wild, most prominent being Svalbard and the Norwegian islands north of Scandinavia, as well as in Greenland. You can see them there as well. But generally speaking, the bears in the European Arctic are solitary and tend to be far off from your viewing spot. And they must be viewed from large expedition ships. So adventures there are incredible, and it's a beautiful region. It is more difficult to come within close range of a polar bear, and you will see them there in really only as individuals, not in large groups. Churchill, on the other hand, is known as the polar bear capital of the world. It's also known as the gateway to the Arctic, as Churchill is an important travel hub for northern communities. The town of Churchill has wonderful health center for people to come from all over the north and even from south into their health center. So it's become an important gateway for the northern people. Churchill also lies at the confluence of a lot of different habitats, which makes it the best place in the world to view a variety of Arctic animal life. We've got the northern tundra, the boreal forest, the southern prairies, the Hudson Bay, and then the Churchill and Seal rivers, and all of that contributes to making Churchill what is known as the accessible Arctic, a place where you can see lots of different Arctic wildlife in one spot. Among the many creatures you may see there would be Arctic fox, red fox, caribou, snowy owl, and even wolves. I've seen wolves there. All of these animals can be seen in different plumages throughout the year. In the summer, this is one of the most amazing sights in Churchill. In the summer, you can see thousands of beluga whales that come in from Hudson Bay into the rivers because the rivers are shallow and warm, and they can go in there to molt. And those who journey there can view these dozens of beluga whales at a time from small motorized zodiacs or even from kayaks and while snorkeling, which is really a wonderful adventure. One of the other things that Churchill is known for is it sits right under the Van Allen belt in the atmosphere, which is an oval-like circle above the Arctic that it makes a great spot for viewing the northern lights. And if you've ever had a chance to view the northern lights, it's certainly a special experience, and that happens in Churchill as highly as it does anywhere else on the planet. But why are polar bears in Churchill? Why is Churchill the best place in the world to view polar bears? Well, this is the only spot in the world where polar bears congregate in large numbers. You've seen on the map previously that showed the distribution of polar bears worldwide. So they are distributed quite widely, but in most areas, at most times of the year, polar bears are distinctly solitary creatures. They're animals who do not tolerate the presence of each other. They're solitary hunters. That's not the case in Churchill, Manitoba, which is known as the polar bear capital of the world. So back to the map of Canada and the vast Hudson Bay, which is the basis for the polar bear migration. In the wintertime, the bears live in the northern portion of the bay and on up into the high Arctic around Baffin Island, you can see up in the upper right section of this map. They are out there hunting ring seals and other marine mammals where they become such large creatures. We'll go to the next image and we'll talk about the summertime. In the summertime in the bay, the prevailing northern winds, as the ice breaks apart, the prevailing northern winds blow rafts of ice to the southern shores. And the bears land there from May or June through about November or December. They're waiting on shore without eating. So these large 1,100 pound bears can lose a large portion of their weight in the hundreds of pounds during that time. And their urgent goal is to wait on those shores and to get back out onto the ice as soon as possible so they can once again hunt ring seals. I mentioned earlier that polar bears were the largest land carnivore, but they're actually considered marine mammals. They spend so much time on ice and in the water that they're considered marine mammals. And all winter long, from November, December, all the way through May or June, they need to be on that ice hunting seals. And as they wait on shore from June through November, December, the bears tend to congregate around the Churchill River. As a cold snap of winter arrives in October and November, the bears know that the pack ice will form in Churchill first. So the entire bay needs to be frozen, but they want to get on that ice as quick as possible. It forms in Churchill first because the Churchill and Seal rivers empty into the Hudson Bay, and the fresh water freezes before the salt water. Then the northern winds again push whatever ice forms up against those southern shores. Those same winds that blew them southward in the spring and summer are now blowing the ice southward up against the shore so the bears can go out on the ice and once again hunt ring seals. So the bears know this and they wait in Churchill. At that point, they will resume their solitary lifestyle until the following spring when they'll once again land on the southern shores. So this is the time, October and November, that we go out to view bears. Now, a little bit about polar bear tourism. It's a very, very interesting ecotourism example. If you can imagine, while nowadays Churchill, the people of Churchill, are proud of their bears, the townspeople hadn't always been enamored with these dangerous animals wandering into town. If you can imagine, with about 1,000 year-round residents in Churchill and a polar bear population of about the same number, a natural contentious relationship was bound to form. But in the late 70s and early 80s, a video came out from National Geographic called Polar Bear Alert, and it brought the world's attention to this sleepy grain port. And people started to come up to want to view these bears. They can only reach Churchill by airplane or by train. There are no roads, but people started to make their way there. And this small grain port that was often economically challenged started to earn some revenue from the polar bears as a sustainable natural resource. And attitudes began to shift in the town of Churchill, where they started to think of themselves as the polar bear capital of the world. And unthinkable just decades ago, they've now erected several statues of polar bears throughout their town and are proud to be the polar bear capital of the world. When a bear would come into town many years ago, it would be shot, and understandably to protect their children. Now there's a system for notifying authorities that a bear is near town. The bear is darted and moved out of town, put into a polar bear holding facility they call the polar bear jail, and then released safely to go north of town to go back and live freely. And all of this is because of ecotourism. So how do our polar bear adventures work? We've talked a little bit about why the bears are there, and that we have these trips and how it's helping the bears through ecotourism. Now, how do people go about participating in these trips? How do we come face to face with these giant creatures and live to tell about it? Well, all the trips start in Winnipeg, which again is about 1,000 miles south of Churchill. And as I said, there are no roads that go from Winnipeg to Churchill. So in Winnipeg, we start our trip there. We meet our guides, all of our expedition leaders, wait for their small groups in Winnipeg. And we stay overnight in this wonderful old railroad hotel called the Hotel Fort Garry. And then we have a private plane that we fly with our groups from Winnipeg on up to Churchill. Upon arrival in Churchill, we'll quickly see that the landscape and the environments are well suited to polar bears. Our adventures are centered around our time spent on the tundra, viewing bears and other wildlife. And each day we head out in our polar rovers, which are remarkable machines that allow us to get close to these animals very safely, much closer than you can ever imagine. Each rover holds about 30 to 40 guests, but we limit our groups to approximately 16 because we want to ensure that everybody has room for their camera gear, room for their parkas, and everyone has their own windows to view the bears. That's very, very important. You're only in Churchill a couple of times, once or twice perhaps, although we do get many repeat travelers to Churchill. You don't go that frequently. You want to get the most out of your adventure, so you do want your own window and your own seat. So we have an intimate experience with the bears, and the expedition leader and the drivers are the ones that sort of lead these trips and get you to the best spot for viewing bears. At this point, the bears are roaming the tundra, sort of foraging, just waiting for the bay to freeze. They'll go out testing the ice and such, but they're very curious about us because as we go out there, we have different smells than what they're accustomed to, and they want to see who it is that's visiting them. And they'll even stop to investigate by putting their paws up on our vehicles at times. And over the years of running these northern safaris, we've worked with a gentleman who builds these vehicles to to add some remarkable features like reversed sloping windshields so that we can look down on the bears and get very close. There's also full flush toilets and heat in the Polar Rovers, and they're extremely comfortable with full bus-type seats that are very soft and plush. One of the most exciting features that I love about our Polar Rovers are the steel mesh floors that are on the back platforms. They've been installed because the bears like to come beneath our vehicles and to smell us. Why they go beneath the vehicles, I'm not exactly sure. They do like the smell of rubber, so you'll see them sniffing their tires, and they will sniff underneath and try to smell our boots. A few years ago, I brought my 8-year-old son up to see the polar bears, and one of the bears came beneath him and reached up with his tongue through the mesh steel and licked his winter boots, which was something that he will not soon forget in his life. Of course, a most important element to any nature adventure, including our polar bear trips, is the expedition leader. And the people that lead these trips, they know polar bears, of course, and all the wildlife. They have an average of nearly a decade of guiding experience in Churchill. They've guided elsewhere as well, for brown bears, other areas of the Arctic, but each of them has spent approximately 10 years guiding in Churchill, and they really know their stuff. And our team comes from around the world. This is Rinnie, one of our naturalists, has been with us about 13, 14 years, and Rinnie is a Dutch naturalist and professional photographer who spent over a dozen years also in the European Arctic studying polar bears, and then every fall with us and our guests guiding our polar bear trips and teaching photography. When we're out on the tundra, this is what you may see. You may see the giant males, again being solitary, testing the ice to see, hey, when can I head out to start hunting ring seals again? You may see the young males play fighting, learning how to interact with other polar bears. And then you may see mothers and their young. It's one of the most endearing encounters you can see in nature. To see a mother polar bear and a cub is absolutely special. And as I discussed, there's a lot of other wildlife as well, fox, ptarmigan, Arctic hare. And this becomes a northern safari. It's not just about polar bears. We go around on the vehicles as though it were safari where we can see a lot of different creatures. And as I mentioned, the Northern Lights is one of the great benefits of the town of Churchill, where it sits geographically beneath the Van Allen belt. Does make it a wonderful spot for viewing the Northern Lights. And during our season, during October and November, we average a good sighting about every 4 to 6 nights in the town of Churchill. During the winter time, when we go back up there in January through March, it's much more frequent even. We have trips there in the winter time specifically to view the Northern Lights, and we see that probably 50% of the nights. But of course, the polar bears are the main attraction, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the 6 different ways that you can experience this phenomenon. First trip is our flagship polar bear expedition, and it is 6 or 7 days. We have choice of each, and it's what we call the classic polar bear adventure. And it's based in motels in town, very simple, very clean motels. And we take excursions during the day out in our rovers. And as well as a nighttime excursion, hoping that we can see some of the Northern Lights and also be able to see some of the nocturnal animals that may be running around the tundra. Mostly it's just a time to experience the Arctic North during the nighttime. Then we have our specialized polar bear photography adventure, which is similar to our classic polar bear trips. They're a little bit longer, spend a little bit more time out on the polar rovers, and they are led by our expedition leaders who are also professional photographers. And so for those folks who are particularly keen about photography, who would like to look at their f-stops and do a little more technology, or even just learn about more about it, I would recommend the special polar bear photography adventures, and those are, you can hopefully come home with a little more insight into photographing white polar bears on white snow, and some insight into general nature photography. Our third trip is our Tundra Lodge adventure. And you can see our Tundra Lodge right there. It is one of the most unique lodges in the world. Every fall and in September, end of September, early October, we roll this lodge out there. It sleeps 30 people, each in individual cabins, and it is an absolutely incredible facility. We perch it right on a little spit of land that goes into the bay, and polar bears come around because, again, that's where the ice forms first. So all times of day and night, we may see polar bears, we may see northern lights. I've stayed out there where the middle of the night, the wind's whipping, and you can hear it outside, and you look out and you see northern lights, and beneath that might be an Arctic fox running around and a polar bear. In the middle of the night in the Arctic, it's a remarkably comfortable facility. You can see here how we place it out there. We also keep a polar rover out there to be doing safaris from our Tundra Lodge, and head out on excursions during the day. We've got a full living area there and a full kitchen. We bring in a wonderful chef and a beautiful dining area. So it's really a special experience. Then we also have on the Tundra Lodge our Tundra Lodge photography adventures. We only run a couple of these a year, and that's for people who want to stay on the Tundra Lodge and have the photography instruction. These generally are sold out a year, more than a year in advance, but they're for people who are very, very keen on photography. Then we've got our Ultimate Churchill adventure. And while every trip gets a taste of the full Northland and its cultural history with presentations in the evening and such, the Ultimate Churchill adventure is designed not only spend plenty of time viewing bears, but also it offers a chance to explore the area much more deeply. We fly by helicopter out to the female bear's denning area, where remarkably we can actually climb inside an unoccupied polar bear den. I will stress to you that it is unoccupied. That's the important part there. These are old dens, and I have done this several times, climbed inside the den. There's an actual picture of me. My son took this one, my 8-year-old boy, and we climbed in that little den right there. And it's really a special experience to think that a mother polar bear goes in there in December, and then in March emerges with a little fluff ball of a cub, and we're able to go and actually see how they do that way back in these small little dens carved into the side of small hills. And this Ultimate Churchill adventure will also participate in an extended dog sledding excursion and learning about the dogs and the northern people and how they've historically depended on the dogs and worked with them. If we're lucky, we'll get to witness a polar bear lift. A lot of our trips actually get to see this one, where the bears are taken. As I mentioned, if a bear is a problem bear in town, it will be brought to the polar bear jail, the holding facility, and then it will be airlifted later north of town out to an area so it can continue to go out onto the ice. And since Natural Habitat financially supports the lifting of these bears for their own protection, we get radio calls from the scientists when it's about to happen, so we can scurry on over to the facility and be able to watch this. It's really an incredible sight to be able to see a polar bear be lifted out to safety, and it makes us all feel very good about what we're doing with ecotourism. The final adventure we have is our newest one. We started it last year, and that is our Town and Tundra adventure. It sort of gives the best of both worlds in terms of staying out on the tundra for a couple of days at our Tundra Lodge, and then coming into town to stay in the town where we can do some of the cultural things and explore as well. For those people who may not feel as comfortable being out on the Tundra Lodge for the whole time, this is a wonderful opportunity to be able to have a couple of days of that and a couple of days in town. It's probably my favorite adventure because I do like to get into town and do some of the cultural things. But I also like to be out on the tundra, on our Tundra Lodge, to be able to experience the Northland in its fullest. That explains, where we are, what how our trips work. the 6 different ways to view a polar bear, close range, and live to tell about it. Just a couple of words about Natural Habitat Adventures and World Wildlife Fund. We've been working with World Wildlife Fund for well over a decade now, where we're their exclusive travel provider. And we work very closely together to try to make travel an important part of conservation. Obviously, World Wildlife Fund is a leading organization in protecting our planet, and as a leading company that takes people out to view wildlife in order to create these tourism, ecotourist destinations to help protect wildlife and their habitats, we've come together to form this partnership with the World Wildlife Fund. Scientists train our expedition leaders. We have access to all of their scientific papers and all the most up-to-date scientific information on all sorts of different issues. Obviously here, our guides get to learn from the very top scientists all about polar bears. And then the most important part of that is to share that information with our guests. And so it's a very beneficial partnership for everybody, including our guests. It's something I think it's important that we talk about. I'm going to be taking as many questions as you guys have. I want to thank you all for spending the time with me today. And I hope to see you in Churchill someday soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. That was great, and I know that we do have some good questions here for those of you who may have come in after I talked about using the question box. Just a quick reminder, you can send in questions now through the question box over on the right-hand side of the screen. There is an orange button with a white arrow. You might need to press that in order to have the control panel open up and give you access to those questions. So, and then I'll read those to Ben. So Ben, we have this question that came in. Any chance of viewing polar bears on the Aurora tours?
Not really. It's hard. We have seen them, but not frequently. We do see polar bears often in our summer trips where we go out to see the beluga whales. The mother polar bears and their young from that year, the cubs of the year, they don't head northward again on the ice. They actually hang around Churchill the following summer. So we'll often see mothers and cubs during our Churchill summer adventures. But during the winter adventures where we go out to see the northern lights, it's pretty rare to see the polar bears during that time.
Okay. What about other wildlife? Is there other wildlife you might see on the Aurora tours?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of Arctic fox, and quite honestly, we've had people come up on our polar bear trips specifically to view Arctic fox. They're incredible animals, absolutely white, and they dart around the tundra, really intriguing animals. So it's worth the trip right there just to watch Arctic fox run around. But there are loads of ptarmigan. Snowy owl are incredible animals with giant wingspan. You can actually hear them fly. So those are the main ones.
Sounds amazing. Okay. Well, what about cultural activities in town? Could you give a few examples of what might be able to take place in town?
Yeah, absolutely. Besides, of course, dog sled excursions and so on, because even in our trips that aren't that ultimate Churchill trip, we do offer people optional short excursions with dog sleds and such. But aside from that, we do presentations from local Inuit on caribou art, different types of historical elements of what it was like to grow up in the subarctic. So we have a lot of different presentations from local people on everything from cultural history to even contemporary northern art.
Okay. And then let's shift gears and talk about food for a moment. There are some questions about that, specifically whether dietary accommodations can be made for vegans, but maybe other people would be interested in their particular situation as well.
Oh, absolutely. If you can imagine, we're a company focused on viewing nature or wildlife in its natural habitat. We do get quite a few people who are vegans and vegetarians, and we can accommodate all of that. That's not a problem whatsoever. We do fly food in, or we bring it on the train. So we bring a lot of food in. We recognize that there will be people with special dietary needs. you're not going to have as much variety as you might in New York City or Denver, or especially here in Boulder, Colorado. But we certainly do every year accommodate a lot of people with special dietary needs.
Thanks. And speaking of the trains, several people are curious to know whether they can actually take the train to and from Churchill themselves, and whether they might be able to come in a few days early or stay a little bit longer, or you know, add something else on to the basic experience.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. The trains into Churchill are, in a word, a disaster. The tundra is basically some dirt on top of ice. It's permafrost. The trains are constantly being delayed. We have a shipment right now that's a week late. So there are things that, you know, the train is cool. I've done the train, but it is constantly late. I would say when we have had people come in by trains, at least 50% of the time there is some sort of scheduling problem. So we don't recommend it. In terms of getting extra hotels and such in Churchill, it's very difficult. You know, we have all of the hotels that we use are all scheduled, so we don't have additional rooms. So it is difficult to do. Can be done, but I'd say half of the time that it is, the schedule of the train is impacts the tour, and it could be such that you miss out on all your polar bear watching.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. Okay, speaking of polar bear watching, there's several people are interested in photography and wondering if there will be someone there to provide photo tips for shooting in the snow.
Yeah, absolutely. Every one of our expedition leaders has at least a very good familiarity with photography. They're all into photography. Our specialized photography trips, those are the ones that are called our classic polar bear photography trip and our Tundra Lodge photography trip. Those are led by serious professionals who, I mean, they're also our expedition leaders, but they have been published. They're very, very educated on photography and on teaching photography as well. When they're not leading a special photography tour, they certainly, because they lead both, they will answer questions and such, but on the special photography tours, they spend just a little more time because everyone on the trip tends to share that same focus on photography.
Okay, and then speaking of the guides, there was a question here about what happens after the tour. Do guests still enjoy access to the guides or staff for, you know, any questions after the tour is over? Or what about staying in touch with other guests? Does that happen?
Oh, all the time, absolutely. We have, I can't tell you how many guests have met each other on one trip and then go on to another. They keep in touch with each other, share email addresses and Facebook and all that stuff that is beyond me. But yeah, the guides are all available through email. Many of them have their Nat Hab email addresses. Many of them travel a lot, so half of the year they're not really reachable, but you can always reach them via the Nat Hab office, Natural Habitat Adventures office here in Boulder, and we're constantly facilitating communication between our guests and the guides.
Okay, great. Thank you. And there was a question here about books. Are there any recommended books for polar bear behavior or biology? Do the guests get reading lists when they travel?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as people book, we send them a reading list. There's a wonderful book by Norbert Rosing, R-O-S-I-N-G, I believe, on polar bears. That is a beautiful, beautiful coffee table book. That's the one that I recommend for most people. It's really a beautiful book.
Oh, it sounds it. So great. Thank you. On the ultimate trip, do you stay in hotels or the Tundra Lodge?
You stay in hotels in town.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that covers it. I think we've answered all the questions that came in, and Ben, anything else that didn't get addressed today, we'll send over to the team to follow up with individually.
I do have one more thing.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Often people ask me, what's the best time to go? Because we have trips that go from sort of the beginning mid-October all the way through the end of November. And people want to know, well, what's the best time to see polar bears? And the answer is we really don't know. It all depends on the temperatures. If when the temperatures drop, the bears congregate near the bay, And when the temperature becomes warmer, they are distributed a little more widely. And that happens like sometimes the beginning of the season, October 10th or 15th, the bears are great and there's snow on the ground, and then it warms up and the bears start to distribute a little bit. And then they'll come back together towards the end of the season. Sometimes towards the end of the season, the weather gets so cold that the bay freezes and the bears take off with 24 hours notice, and we only see a few of them. So we never know exactly when the best time to see bears is. A lot of people say, well, let's just go at the middle of the season because, you know, when you're dealing with a migration, why not go in the middle? And that can be true, where the middle is the best time to view the bears. But it's also often not true, where it's often the beginning or the end what's the best time. So we just never really know, and that's really important for people to think about, that you just don't know what's going to happen out with the bears. And I write about this on our website, so people should go to our website, www.nathab.com, and go to our polar bear tours. There's a whole section, a little pop-up called the ebbs and flows of our polar bear, or polar bear viewing. And it's really, it gives more details on what might happen at any different time during the season. And then, of course, if you phone our office, every one of the staff here that would be dealing with our guests knows the polar bear trips intimately, has either been there once or many times and has been working with this for years. So we're happy to talk to you about what's right for you, because what's right for some people is not right for others. So we're happy to work with you on which trip or which departure date may be best.
That's great. Thank you, Ben, very much. Well, is there anything else before we say goodbye to everybody?
No, I really, again, want to thank all of you. So many of the people on here are already guests who have been up to see our polar bears, or guests that are booked for this coming year, and just wanted to hear more about it. And I thank you so much for joining us. It's a very important thing that you're doing and participating in these trips and helping to protect these special animals. So we all very much appreciate it and look forward to seeing you.
My thanks as well, and we will get the replay out to everyone by email, so be on the lookout for that. So we will say good day now and conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. Bye.